Okay. So, yung third part naman is what we call the materials and methods. So, ang tawag po dito sa ibang klase ng articles is the experimental. So this describes the materials and experimental procedures employed in your study. So, for example, dito po sa ating case na to, so you have to talk about sample preparation. So yung nanoparticles, how did you prepare that? Specifications of the materials and instruments used. So ay gumamit ako ng sodium chloride. Minsan po, yung asin na gagamitin nyo, if you're using it for an experiment, you also have to talk about yung mga supplier. Yung mga ganong detalye po. And there's a reason for that. Experimental techniques. Paano nyo ba pinaghalo-halo yung chemicals, for example? Paano nyo ba inassemble yung robot if you're doing such an experiment or study? Sample size or number of replicates, which is also very important. Kasi sabi nga po ni JP kanina, when you're coming up with conclusions, you have to be confident with your data. So, paano ka makakapag-come up ng strong conclusions kung ang inyo pong data quality ay hindi ganun kataas? So, these are things that you have to mention in the section as well. Experimental conditions, variables that you studied. So, for example, if you are trying to come up with, say, like a better way to bake bread, ano ba yung mga variables that you can actually tune para mas ma-optimize pa yon or to come up with a new baking technique. Control experiments rin. So kailangan po dito yung i-detalye nyo rin yan na para maging confident tayo sa ating data at hindi extraneous or hindi ang ating observations is not because of interferences. You also have to mention those here. Okay, nga po, mas maiintindihan nyo to if we will talk about examples. But before we go to that specific contextualization, a couple of tips po. Okay, so materials and methods should actually be detailed enough that kapag binasa po yan or when it's read by other researchers, they can perform the same experiments at the same level of detail, and then ultimately they should be able to replicate your results. So, kung kayo po ay nagsusulat ng materials at methods and you're hiding some details of it, you're actually doing a disservice to the scientific community because kung hindi naman po ito patent, we're talking about publicly accessible research, kailangan po transparent kayo. Kung ano yung ginawa nyo, isulat nyo dyan. Kasi for you to be able to build a reputation that you are a reliable researcher, then able to replicate the results. And then, yung sinabi din kanina ni JP, since ito po ay report na ng natapos na study, you must write the materials and method in the past tense. So sa research proposal po, future tense kasi hindi nyo pa nagagawa yung eksperimento. Sa scientific report po, past tense na kasi nagawa nyo na. Okay? Okay. So himayin po natin, for example, gagawa tayo ng gold nanoparticle. Ang sabi dun sa ating study statement kanina is that, okay, we have to find the cheapest way to come up with the gold nanoparticle. Hopefully, gawa kayo ng kapag na-maximize niyo yung yields ng 5 to 10 nanometers, iti-test nyo for anti-cancer properties. So, ano ba yung mga information that you have to include when you write the materials and methods for this type of study? So, first is specify the reagents and materials used. Experimental techniques. So yung po mga information na sinabi ko kanina. And then, since you're synthesizing a material, you also have to talk about characterization methods. So paano mo malalaman na nakagawa ka ng 5 to 10 nanometers na gold nanoparticles? So you also have to talk about how you confirm that. And then lastly, the end goal here is to test their anti-cancer property. How are you evaluating that particular bioactivity? So again, hihimayin natin yan. So when yung first part, synthesis. So you have to talk about your reagents and instruments that you use. So when sinabi po namin that you have to provide the details about your reagents, you have to talk about yung purity. So for example, if you're using gold chloride, is it 99.99% pure? Is it 98% pure? Is it reagent quality? Yung mga ganyang bagay po, you have to specify that. And the usual mark of a very good researcher is that when they talk about purity, they also identify the manufacturer. Kasi yun nga po, sabi namin, pag sinulat nyo to, dapat kung mag-decide kung nagsulat kayo ng paper at mag-decide akong i-replicate yung study nyo, edi bibilhin ko rin yung same purity from the same manufacturer. That way, sigurado ako na pag pinerform ko ang experiment the exact same way, I can expect na yung result na nakuha nyo, makukuha ko rin. So, ganun po yun. Pangalawa, type and size of glassware. So, ito po mga bagay na to, hindi po to trivial, ano? So, pag gumamit kayo, for example, ng 500 ml round bottom flask, you have to specify that as well. Kasi some of these design elements of your experiment, they matter. So, wag niyo po ito iti-trivialize. Down to the deep, to the tiniest details po, sometimes they count. Kasi again, some of these could influence the outcome. Lab apparatus and equipment use. So, for example, what heating mechanism did you employ? Did you use a heating mantle? Did you use a Bunsen burner? Gumamit po ba kayo ng kahoy dyan? For example, nagsiga po ba kayo? So you have to specify those things para again, pag kinopya ko yung experiments nyo, makukopya ko rin yung inyong results. Okay. So, synthesis, experimental techniques. So, for example, when you're synthesizing gold nanoparticles, there's a number of different techniques that you can employ. But you have to specify that. So for this example, this researcher employed hydrothermal synthesis. So essentially, you have you perform the synthesis in an aqueous environment. So ang solvent niyo po ay tubig, and then you use heat to decompose the reagents for them to form nanoparticles. There's also another technique called colloidal synthesis. So typically, pagdating po dito, organic solvent, hindi tubig ang gagamitin ninyo. So you also have to specify the fact that, okay, we chose these synthetic techniques and you have to identify may specific name ba yung synthesis method na yan. Number of replicates. So since we are trying to come up with the best way to synthesize these materials, kailangan confident ka na, okay, if I perform colloidal synthesis, if I do it 3 to 5 times, if I do the same experiment 3 to 5 times, the outcome should actually be quite consistent. So again, kailangan natin specify ito. Experimental condition, you are synthesizing, so may concentration effects dyan. Ano ba yung tamang concentration ng gold reagent? Anong tamang concentration ng inyong organic reducing agents? Manner of addition, ano bang ginawa nyo? Yung bang silver chloride, ini-add nyo ba sa sodium citrate? Or the other way around? Or pinagsabay nyo ba ng pag-add? Again, you have to specify these things. Reaction time, gano'n nyo katagal ginawa yung reaction? 5, 10, 20 minutes, 24 hours, 7 days? You have to specify those things. Temperatures, stirring rate. So yung pong, kung meron kayong stir bar, kung meron kayong magnetic stir plate, kailangan po, ano ba yan, 2,000 rotations per minute ba? Is it 200 rotations per minute? So some of these things that, or some of these factors that could affect the result, you have to specify them. Okay? Okay, another aspect. So pag nagawa mo na yung nanoparticles, you have to confirm, are you making the right size? 5 to 10 nanometers pa? Size uniform ba? Kanihan ba ng inyong mga products ay nandun sa size range yun? Or is it more of a statistical distribution? So in the materials and method section, you have to talk about your characterization method. So for example, since you're synthesizing a material and you're using it for some bio activity measurements, you have to also be sure of the purity. So how do you measure the purity of, say, gold nanoparticles? So you can employ elemental analysis or compositional analysis, and those are broad terms. So you have to specify, did you perform combustion analysis? Did you use TGA? Did you use inductively coupled plasma, atomic emission spectroscopy? So some of those things you have to specify, even yung model ng unit na ginagamit po ninyo to analyze these samples. So nanoparticle size, did you use imaging? Anong type ng imaging? Did you use scanning electron microscopy? Did you use tunneling electron microscopy? Did you use a specific statistical method to measure size and size distribution? So yung mga ganyan bagay po, you have to provide them these details in your materials section. And then when it comes to your evaluation, say, of bioactivity, say, anti-cancer property, you also have to specify, ano ba yung method of investigation ninyo? Did you do in vivo studies? Anong type ng cells ang ginamit? Or do you use animal cancer cells? Do you use human cancer cells? And even within those types of cells, you have to specify, is it breast cancer cell? Is it prostate cancer cell? So again, mga detalye po kailangan ninyong i-provide sa materials and methods.